Hey everyone, this is Nephis here, and at long last I have made my Necromancer tank guide video. Everything you know about the Necromancer tank for PvE in the Elder Scrolls Online is in this video. You guys have been very curious and very eager, asking me left and right what I think about it, how to properly utilize it, and if it's actually viable to play. I'll be answering those questions and more in this video. If I didn't answer a curiosity or question of yours, let me know down in the comments below and I'll try to reply to it when I can. Now, I'll be releasing Necromancer tank specific builds in the near future after this video, so this video in particular is going to be more of a general guide about the Necromancer tank and everything it entails, rather than the specifics of certain gear setups for certain content. So to start off, the Necromancer tank has a very fun and active playstyle, even when compared to the other classes such as a Dragon Knight tank or a Warden tank. Immediately, seasoned players can see that the Necromancer class itself has ridiculous passes, ridiculous debuffs, buffs, and skills. The ZeniMax developers have stated a few times that their approach to this class will be making it overpowerful at first, in comparison to how they approached the Warden in Morrowind, and then steadily notch it down until they think it's at a good balanced point in relation to the other classes. The playstyle of the class leans towards heavy mitigation and ultimate generation, while rewarding those with a higher pool of health. At first glance as well, it doesn't seem to have a very great burst heal comparable to Dragon Knights or the Wardens with their Polar Winds and Green Dragon Blood, but more on that later. So if you're a PvE Necromancer tank, expect to be building towards both high health and a good amount of magicka recovery. You'll actively be keeping up a lot of magicka heavy skills, almost in rotation, that provides mitigation and debuffs for yourself and your groups while gaining an insane amount of ultimate. In summary, it has shades of what Warden, Dragon Knight, and Nightblade tanking are, and is pretty much a very unique support class in the end in itself. The first thing we're going to be looking over are the skills and passives to see which you'll be actually utilizing as a Necromancer tank. First, in the Gravelord skill tree, we have the Ultimate Frozen Colossus. There's been some people arguing for it to be used by Necro tanks for boss fights or trash fights, as it's slightly cheaper by 25 ultimate than Aggressive Warhorn, which in comparison gives a 10% increase to max magicka, max stamina, and grants major force to everybody in your group, a 30% increase to critical damage to, again, the group. Aggressive Warhorn is much better to use for your raid and dungeon group still, for pretty much every boss fight and long trash pulls. The only scenarios where we can perhaps justify using this as a tank is if you simply don't care about using Warhorn, or if the fights are so short that a horn wouldn't matter and that the major vulnerability ultimate is available before the horn in that case. Regardless, for trials, if you are the off-tank DPS, you'll most likely go with Pestilent Colossus as it deals less damage, which is great since you'll most likely be an off-tank stamina Necromancer DPS. For more information about what an off-tank is in ESO, please click the video on the upper right. The first skill is a spammable provided to Necromancers called Flame Skull. It's a pretty cool looking animation, but otherwise it's mostly for damage dealers or cases where you are the off-tank DPS in trials, in which case you'll want Venom Skull. The second skill is Blast Bones, again, a pretty cool skill but no use for it if you're just actually tanking. Now here's where things get more interesting for us Necromancer tanks with the third skill. Boneyard is an AoE that provides a synergy to everybody else in your group. Here we have the choice between Unnerving Boneyard, which provides an AoE Major Breach and Fracture, while still providing a synergy to others. The other morph, Avid Boneyard, doesn't have the AoE Major Breach and Fracture, but instead gives you the ability to synergize your own skill. Both of these skills are incredibly unprecedented. In the Elder Scrolls Online, you can only typically synergize other people's skills like Orbs, Blood Altar, Shard, Bone Shield, whatever, but never your own. This is the first time ever in this game that you are able to synergize off of your own skill, and this can have some implications such as giving yourself a little bit of resource sustain or helping keep up Alkosh. Now, Unnerving Boneyard is also very interesting, as this is the first time in ESO where you have an AoE skill that applies both major resistance debuffs. Other skills such as Elemental Drain or Noxious Breath are either or of those debuffs or are just single target. We have to remember that Major Breach shaves off 5,280 spell resistance and Fracture shaves off the same amount in physical resistance. Now that is a good amount of armor penetration for your group, and the fact that it's AoE and debuffs everything in it is so ridiculously strong in trash fights, and the fact that it's ranged makes us reconsider some tank basics, including Pierce Armor, which is a single target debuff and taunt that has the same properties of Boneyard. In fact, it's so good and easy to keep up as a tank. Plus, it's just 5 seconds away from the full duration of Pierce Armor that we are going to be completely replacing Pierce Armor with Boneyard, and in fact use the other morph of the taunt Ransack to gain extra physical resistance with this morph for fights when we will only need melee taunts in certain trial boss fights. For the most part, however, we'll only be using the Magicka morph of the Undaunted range taunt Inner Fire in place of a melee taunt. I'll expand on why later. Also, one thing you guys may have missed is that if someone activates Grave Robber, the synergy of your Boneyard, the damage that synergy does heals you for the same amount it damaged whatever was standing in it. So just let that sink in for a moment. Synergy damage in ESO is based off of whoever uses it, the user's max stats, not the caster's max stats, not you, not the tank. But the synergy user. So if you have multiple things in your Boneyard, or even just one boss, and then a DPS synergizes the Boneyard with all their buff stats, weapon damage, magic spell damage, and the max stats, and expect your health to literally jump up a bit. It's a pretty good burst heal if someone uses a synergy. The next skill, Skeletal Mage. Again, this is going to be more for DPSing, so we're going to be skipping over it. The last skill in this tree is Shocking Siphon. Again, it seems like it's for the damage dealers. However, Mystic Siphon is an interesting ability and morph we can consider for tanking, especially in fights where there will be adds that'll die in your group's cleave damage, from which you can siphon Magicka from their corpses. It is actually stronger than the Warden's Betting Edge in terms of how much more Magicka you're gaining back. So for example, the Warden's Betting Edge gets you 200 Magicka back every second for 24 seconds, while Mystic Siphon gets you 225 Magicka back every second for 12 seconds. However, this is a very situational skill, especially for a lot of boss fights where there may not be that many adds, or adds that are not ready to die so quickly. So we're going to be keeping this in our toolbox and in the back of our minds instead of on our primary bars as a Necromancer tank, so you guys can switch it out or switch it in for fights where you think you may need it. For the passives of the Gravelord tree, we can mostly ignore Death Knell, Rapid Rot, and Dismember. They're mostly there for the damage dealers. However, reusable parts, which gives us a 25% cost reduction for the next summon pet, will be useful for us later when we pick up a certain skill. The Bone Tyrant skill line, which is the next skill I'm going to be looking at, is Necromancer Tank Heaven. First, the ultimate Bone Goliath is absolutely OP. It's absolutely overpowered. It's incredibly tempting to use it over anything because it looks so damn cool and it functions so well. Props to whoever over at ZeniMax made this skill. It's basically the Necromancer's version of the Dragon Knight's Magma Armor. In some ways it's better, and in others it's worse. You get 30,000 more max health as a tank, and if you take into consideration you're going to be building towards a lot of health as a Necro tank, this can easily get you above 80 to 90,000 max health in PvE, essentially making you unkillable in a lot of scenarios. In terms of the 20-second duration, it's a lot longer than Magma Shell from Dragon Knight skill line, which is only about 9 seconds. Furthermore, when you are Bone Goliath, your light attacks and heavy attacks give you health back. The first morph, Pummeling Goliath, gives you an AoE bash attack, which is pretty insane in Cyrodiil PvP right now. Probably a lot more insane if you're a Necromancer Emperor. However, for PvE, we'll be going with the second morph, Ravenous Goliath. If having 30,000 more health for 20 seconds wasn't going to satisfy you, then the health-sucking aura around you that leeches off of anything in your vicinity is going to make you cream your pants. It is literally almost impossible to die, even to the hardest hitting trash in the game, when your aura is simply giving you so much healing in addition to that ludicrous amount of max health you get from casting the ultimate. Of course, compared to its cousin Magma Shell, it has a couple downsides. The first is that you're not completely invincible. Magma Shell is the closest you can probably get to invincibility in this game. as it limits incoming damage to only 3% of your max health. This means if you get hit by a 50k heavy attack from a boss, you're only going to lose only 3% of your max health from that attack. Whereas if you get hit by a 50k heavy attack from a boss, as a Necromancer, you're going to be losing 50,000 health while in Goliath form. The second downside is, in comparison to Magma Shell, is that this ultimate says it's an instant cast time. However, it most certainly is not, according to the tooltip. It is a channel, much like the werewolf transformation, and this can leave you extremely vulnerable to being stunned or killed should you choose to activate it at a very bad time. In terms of using this to just survive and tank a ridiculous amount, however, for fun, it's definitely a very solid ultimate to use. The next skill we're going to be looking at is the first skill, Death Scythe. It is my answer to the question of what is a Necro tank's burst heal. The Magicka morph heals you for a ridiculous amount in trash fights, boss fights with trash, or even when the only thing you can hit is the boss. This is going to be your class burst heal, in fact, as it also just scales off of your max health. Not your max Magicka, not your max stamina like Vigor or Breath of Life, but your max health, plus however many points you have into the champion point blessed. Of course, the obvious downside is that you need to be able to hit something to heal yourself with Scythe, so in fights where you may not be able to hit something all the time, you'll most likely go with the Alliance War heal Vigor, which is more of a heal over time. Bone Armor is a Necromancer's armor buff, the source of your Major Resolve and Major Ward, which every class has access to in at least one class skill. The unique thing about this skill, however, is that it creates a corpse when the duration is up, allowing you to play with the concept of Necromancer Ultimate Generation even further. However, just to keep it brief and simple, of these two morphs, Beckoning Armor and Summoner's Armor, the morph you'll most likely go with as a PvE Necro tank is Beckoning, as it pulls in any hostile mob that hits you with a ranged attack. Keep in mind it says ranged attacks. I've confirmed that enemies who are typically melee will still be chained to you if they throw a projectile or a ranged attack at you. With Beckoning Armor, we're going to go back to why we're really using Inner Fire a lot. This taunt is ranged. You don't need the melee taunt Pierce Armor to debuff priority targets anymore in a trash pack or something, because you literally have an AoE, Major Breach and Fracture, that also gives a synergy to your group, which heals you for the amount of damage done. Most adds that will attack you from afar, and that need to be chained in are typically ranged. So taunting the ranged adds actually will take priority at most times, while your initial soft taunts will be enough to take care of the melee adds. If you would like to know more about what a soft taunt is, please check out the video in the upper right corner. Necromancer tanks definitely will get a lot of use out of soft taunts, considering that their skills are so Magicka heavy and may strain you at times depending on the situation. Anyway, while chaining in adds without effort may sound like a great concept, this skill does not provide such a thing, as it actually has an internal cooldown of 3 seconds after it pulls something in, so you may still need to figure out a different way to stack trash in some parts of a dungeon or trial as a Necromancer tank, or rely on Silver Leash from the Fighters Guild skill line, which can be used to great effect on priority adds that need to be pulled in as soon as possible, like the Dark adds on the Marvel Cottage Twins fight, or the cats during the Zajhasa fight. It does kinda suck waiting for range adds to attack you as well, so there's that, but it's still the morph you want, as the other morph Summoner's Armor only reduces the cost of your summon abilities, something which you have absolutely no use for due to the reusable parts you already get, and the fact you're only going to be using only one summon as a Necro tank. Keep in mind that bosses or elite adds with ranged attacks can trigger Beckoning Armor actually, with no effect on them, which may ruin some ad pulls as it will be on cooldown for the next 3 seconds. So the next skill, Bitter Harvest, is where the awesome ultimate generation feature of the Necro tank kicks in. You'll basically use this when there's dead things around you, and you get essentially 4 ultimate and some healing done in the span of 2 seconds per corpse. It's a lot of ultimate generation, and if the Necro ultimates were any cheaper, well, their ultimate spin would be real. Now, looking at the morphs Death and Pain and Necrotic Potency, this is more or less up to you to decide. I personally have preferred the Death and Pain morph due to the major protection you gain for the duration of however long the skill lasts for. Keep in mind either morph seems to have a time cap of 12 seconds, so that's 6 corpses no matter how many souls you keep absorbing. This means even if you absorb 30, 50 souls, the duration of either morph will never ever go over 12 seconds, and instead just refresh counting down from 12 seconds provided you hit 6 corpses. So at most, with Death and Pain, I'm getting 12 seconds of major protection, whereas you get more ultimate per corpse with necrotic potency. Did I also mention just slotting this skill gives you 3% damage reduction against most attacks? We're definitely slotting the skill in the sword and board bar to further mitigate incoming damage, so while you may not have extra spell resistances like a Dragon Knight or Templar tank, you're still getting mitigation. Resistances is not the end-all be-all for tanks regardless of how well they play, but that will be a video for another time. The fourth skill in the tree is where your group starts noticing your presence even more. Bone Totem is yet another unprecedented skill in the Elder Scrolls Online compared to anything we've ever seen before. Previously, the only readily available sources of minor protection came from slotting Temporal Guard from the Sigil skill line to mitigate damage on that one bar only, or both bars if you slotted on both bars, or casting Circle Protection from the Fighters Guild skill line, affecting 6 total people in its AoE. Circle Protection, however, uses quite a lot of stamina, which may be detrimental at times to the tanks or healers or support DPS using it for certain trial fights. Bone Totem changes the game, however, as it's pretty much the same as Circle Protection, but a skill that uses Magicka instead of stamina. While it may not last as long as its Fighters Guild counterpart of 20 plus seconds, you'll be able to gain Magicka back anyway more easily in comparison to blocking and not getting any stamina back. In addition, it's also crowd control ability, which holds the trash in place for 4 entire seconds. 4 seconds is a long time, and this will be useful primarily in ad-heavy boss fights or trash pulls. Looking at the morphs, we have Remote Totem and Agony Totem. While I can see that there may be sometimes a use for Remote Totem, I went with Agony Totem for 2 primary reasons. Number 1, Agony Totem provides a synergy for others to use, which will eventually apply AoE minor vulnerability to anything in the Bone Totem AoE. That is pretty damn amazing because minor vulnerability generally comes from only shock damage or infallible Aether, a set that pretty much every healer is required to have to buff damage of their group or raid team. The fact that it's AoE and the fact that you'll most likely have it up a lot due to its short duration makes this morph incredibly strong. The second reason I went with Agony Totem is that most of the time you need to give your group minor protection. While the other morph also does the same thing, when you give minor protection to other people, you're generally with them anyway. Most dungeons, plus a lot of trial fights, you're often stacked on or very close to your groups, such as the Assembly General and the Halls of Fabrication, Hunter Killers for Kot, the Serpent, and so on and so on. The last skill we will be reviewing in the Bone Tyrant is Grave Grasp. This is basically the Necromancer's version of the Dragon Knight's Talons, with both pros and cons in comparison. Unlike Talons, however, you'll have to actually aim this skill as it comes out in 3 AoEs in a single file line. This can be inconvenient or convenient depending on how the trash is scattered in trials or dungeons, but it's still very usable as an AoE minor maim, which is essential for both trash pulls and boss fights. The morphs we'll be looking at for the skill is Ghostly Embrace and Empowering Grasp. While it may be tempting to take Empowering Grasp to help boost your team's damage, you'll have to keep in mind that you have to aim this at your fellow players rather than the mobs. This creates a little problem of the tank being behind the group, which is traditionally the position of the healer, rather than the front taking all the hits, especially in the dungeon. Plus, Empower for 5 seconds, it won't really make or break a fight in terms of damage, especially if you think you're going to be running out of Magicka trying to provide a close to 100% uptime on this, when you have even more important things to keep up, such as Crusher and other buffs and debuffs. This is why I went with Ghostly Embrace, because it's more of a pure tank skill, and also immobilizes up to 3 targets at a time. This actually plays really well in the 1-2-3 combo with the Boneyard's AoE armor debuffs, the Fear from the Bone Totem which holds them in place, and the minor vulnerability AoE that gets put on them from the synergy. The crowd control capability of the Necromancer tank, I would argue, rivals that of the Dragon Knight tank at this point. There will be times, however, when you use Heroic Slash over Ghostly Embrace, mostly when it's just purely a boss fight without any adds. In terms of passives from the skill tree, pretty much every passive is pretty nice for Necro tanks. Death Gleaning will give you 200 magicka back and stamina back every time a hostile NPC or mob dies within 28 in-game meters of you. That's a huge area, and 200 magicka and stamina every time something dies while you're blocking and casting abilities will definitely help in some trash pulls. Disdain Harm gives out extra damage mitigation I've mentioned at the start of this video to Necro tanks, giving us a 10% damage reduction against damage over time abilities or effects when we have a Bone Tyrant skill active. So if you have your armor buff up, a scythe heal up, Agony Totem, Goliath, whatever, you're just automatically gonna get a 10% damage mitigation against dots, which is pretty nice. And Health Avarice is also a strong passive for us tanks because it's going to give us at most 8% healing received. That's from all sources, including yourself, on the front bar, since you have a lot of these skills slotted. Last Gasp, ironically the last passive in this tree, simply gives you free health. Free health for a tank is never ever something to complain about, especially when some of your vital skills as a Necro tank, including Goliath, Scythe, scales off of your health and not magicka or stamina. Lastly, we're going to be looking at the Living Death skill line here, and right away with this skill tree's ultimate Reanimate, we see a lot of uses for it in PvE, especially in progression raids. Last time I checked as well, it bypasses certain mechanics, such as the shades on the dead bodies in Cloud Rest. Anyway, Reanimate is pretty straightforward, there's no trick to it. It's a huge 28 meter AoE. For reference, that's as large as the max range of Breath of Life and other skills like Snipe, and it will resurrect up to 3 dead people in that AoE. It doesn't use soul gems, there's no cast time, nothing, you just use the ultimate and pop. Up to 3 people get the prompt to accept or decline your resurrections. The obvious more for our PvE Necro tank to take is going to be Renewing Animation, which gives us a bunch of magicka and stamina back per person we resurrect with this ability. Obviously, the only downside to using this skill is that you won't be able to use other skills like Warhorn and such, since you'll be saving up for this in anticipation of deaths during a progression run or for a group that's never done something like a DLC dungeon. After using it, it seems fairly solid, doesn't seem to bug out in either PvE or PvP scenarios, and I would say it will definitely help a lot of groups clear content that they couldn't clear before. The other morph simply summons up to 3 blast bones, but that's irrelevant for our tanking, so we're just going to go with this morph. The first skill in the Living Death is actually a trap for us Necro tanks. It sounds sort of good at first, but not really. The Minor Defile is not very attractive, and it scales up, and the heal itself scales off of max magicka. The Minor Defile lasts for 4 seconds, and again, like I said earlier, 4 seconds is a very long time for a tank. I've tried it many times. Tried to make it work. It simply doesn't work at all, especially in harder content, so we're literally just not even going to pay attention to it, as Scythe or Vigor is much better healing without any defile involved, or the chances of the heals is not going anywhere to other people except you, my bad. However, one noteworthy thing I can say is that Resistant Flesh may have some uses for light armor magicka build tanks, as it does give you resistance equal to half of the amount you heal for, so there could be an interesting idea or play there with a future build. But moving on, the second skill, Living Death, is Expunge. It's basically a personal purge at the cost of some health. Just like Efficient Purge from the Alliance 4 support skill line, it removes up to 2 negative effects, including snare, dots, and status effects from yourself, while also giving us a passive 3% ability cost reduction. And this 3% ability cost reduction applies to every skill on that bar, not just your Necromancer's class skills. So this can be a flex slot on the back bar where we have a lot of other skills to cast. Other skills I would put on this flex spot is the Soul Magic skill that gives you resources back from dead enemies, or Purge, the actual Purge for other people if the need arises, or Guard when you need to guard someone. And I went with the Expunge and Modify morph due to the extra magicka and stamina we get per negative effect removed, which is no small thing, as it's 1000 magicka and stamina back per purge per status effect. percent of stats, excuse me. Plus hexproof. The other morph seems to be more for PvP rather than PvE, as you get a lot more negative effects from players in Cyrodiil than you do from bosses or monsters in PvE. The third skill, Life Amid Death, we're going to mostly ignore, as it's meant more for the Necro healers. Spirit Mender is going to be the only summon pet we'll be picking up as Necromancer tanks. Playing with the idea of heavy mitigation yet again, we Necro tanks will pick up the morph called Spirit Guardian. It's basically a poor man's guard, an Alliance War support skill that when you tether to somebody with it, transfers 30% of the damage they take to you instead. However, the Spirit Guardian only takes 10% rather than 30% of your incoming damage, but on a positive note, it's not a player at least taking it for you and potentially dying for you. This skill will play an important role alongside your armor buff, as both the armor buff and this Spirit Guardian skill creates corpses for you to use your Dead and Pain on, giving you some healing and ult gain with major protection. Interestingly enough, if you recast Spirit Guardian Mechaning Armor at less than half of their durations remaining, they will create corpses immediately, while recasting them above half of the remaining durations will not. The last Necromancer skill we're going to be talking about is Restoring Tether. Just like Mystic Siphon, we may have a use for this depending on the situation. Stamina regeneration from the morph Mortal Coil will be very nice at times during heavy boss fights. So we'll keep this, just like the other Siphon skill, in our situational toolbox for now. As for the last passives, Curative Curse is incredibly strong for your skills like Scythe or even Vigor, as you'll most certainly always have a negative effect on you from a bunch of trash or a boss. 8% more healing done is no joke. Same goes for the near-death experience. And this cannot be really ignored, even for tanks, because we do heal ourselves. It's not just for healers. The Corpse Consumption and an Undead Confederate tie the ribbon on the Necromancer tank package, in addition to Dead and Pain, generating ultimate from corpses. Corpse Consumption gives you an extra 10 ultimate every 16 seconds, as well every time you use a corpse. Undead Confederate also gives you a 200 Magicka recovery and stamina recovery bonus, which is going to be great for Magicka using Necro tank, as we are going to be having Spirit Guardian up pretty much the entire time. The best races for a Necromancer tank for PvE, in my opinion, will be the Nord, the Imperial, and the Breton. Nords, as of the Wrathstone patch, have an inbuilt Ultimate Generation passive, which can further boost Necro's already insane ult gen. Imperials still have slightly more health than Nords do, and health, as we've learned, is quite the advantage with this class in particular. Imperials also receive slightly better sustained passives that will shine in mostly 4-man content in comparison to Nord, allowing you to handle all these Magicka skills. And Bretons, while they do not have the health you'd want for Necro tanks like the Imperial or the Nord, they certainly have the sustain to handle it, while also getting extra spell resistance, something which the class doesn't seem to get much out of. Basic gear, enchants, and champion points wise, you can build for more health with wearing certain gear such as Ebon, Plague Doctor, Battalion Defender, Green Pack. Definitely always do 5-1-1 with Undaunted, 5 heavy armor, 1 light, and 1 medium, as this will give you the maximum amount of stats plus access to needed passives from the medium and light armor skill lines, like more magic cost reduction, recovery, dodge roll cost reduction, and so on and so on. Enchantments can either be a mixture of prismatic glyphs with health glyphs or all health glyphs. Traits wise, on your armor, it'll probably be 3 infused on your head, chest, legs, and 4 sturdy on the rest. If you're having some issues with your stamina management, you can try 7 sturdy. There's no real need to grind the Psijic skill line, nor the full Fighters Guild skill line, nor really the Mages Guild skill line. Getting equilibrium for balance is it's up to you. There will be times when you probably not even need your Necromancer armor buff, but I like the idea of it, so I'm going to be sticking with it. If there's fights where it's very simple fights where you can just use balance and get away with it, with healers healing you and so on, definitely use balance. Lastly, becoming a vampire for stage 3 Undeath will be very beneficial. With this amount of mitigation as a Necromancer, you'll be able to survive longer in high stress situations should you meet the Undeath requirements, but never be stage 4, as I always say. Monster sets that you'll definitely need to use or consider at some point will include Swarm Mother. I've been trying it out. It's very, very useful and works very well with Beckoning Armor, particularly for dungeon trash. Bloodspawn is also a very good option still after all these years for a tank, regardless of class, if you have nothing else to wear and if you want extra ultimate regeneration. Earthcore, if you feel like you're not able to heal yourself in a 3 DPS and 1 tank group composition for dungeons. Lord Warden, of course, for certain trial fights where you may need to give more resistances to the group. Symphony for arenas like Dragonstar Arena or other PvE content. Stonekeeper, more on this in a future video, but it can be especially strong on the Necromancer. And of course we have Vycosa for certain fights or trials like Asylum Sanctorium if you're main tanking. But again, as I said at the beginning of this video, I'll be doing separate videos for separate builds for separate stuff. So for your general CP setup, if you don't really want to swap it out for trials or something, but what you do, 81 Ironclad in the Steed, 49 Hardy, 49 Elemental Defender, 81 Thickskin, and this is a very good setup for just most dungeons in particular if you're just interested in dungeons. 10 Heavy Armor Focus for more extra physical resistance. The green tree is going to be 56 Warlord for the basic cost reduction 20%. So we got 16 into Sprinter for 10% cost reduction for sprinting, my bad, and 19 Tenacity. You can get your magic back from a full Destro heavy attack or some stand back with this much. Anything more, honestly, I don't really see a need for, because most of the time you won't even really need to. Heavy attack, 56 Arcanist, and this is going to be the boost to our already high magic Rico, and I'm sitting at about, personally, 1700-ish, 1600-ish magic Rico without a potion buff. With one, I am gonna have 2061, but that's because I have certain traits in my jewelry, use my recovery. Again, not optional, but without this, you can definitely get up to 1200, 1300 magic Rico without infused jewelry. And for the Shadow Tree, we have 72 into Shadow Ward, which is 23% block cost reduction. You don't really need anything more. 51 Tumbling, 19% cost reduction just in case, you need to dodge roll things, and there will be times where you need to dodge roll things as a tank in PvE content. We have 100 Blessed, 50 Elfborn. The Elfborn is going to raise the crit of our healing from the Scythe and also from Blessed. And nothing in here, Diatro, and we have 120 points total into the Ritual Tree for the Last Stand. Always gonna be like this for pretty much almost every tank class. I do this for my Dragon Knight, I do this for my Nightblade tank, I do this for my Templar tank, Warden tank, etc. And your CP allocation for to get to 120 points is gonna be 81 Precise Strikes and 39 Thaumaturge. Why Precise Strikes over Mighty, Piercing, whatever? It's because Precise Strikes actually affects the healing done by Vigor, and there will be times where you may need to use Vigor with Scythe or without Scythe. So this is going to boost Vigor, which is a pretty neat thing to know. But yeah, that's pretty much it for CP. Anyway, thank you guys so much for supporting me and this channel thus far, and thank you again so much for watching this very lengthy video. I'm sure there were parts where you just kind of snoozed through it, which is totally fine. I'll be putting a table of contents in the video description. Again, if you have any questions, let me know down in the comments below, or drop by my Discord to ask anytime. As always, stay safe, have fun, and see you guys next time.